My name is Olivia. I'm 30 years old, and I've been paying my parents' mortgage for the last 3 years. Tonight, they hosted a massive gala for their 30th wedding anniversary at the best steakhouse in the city, and I wasn't on the guest list. My mother told me it was an intimate dinner with limited seating, but when I opened Instagram, I saw the truth. My sister Ava posted a photo of a table for 20 with the caption, "Family only." Finally, we have everyone together. I was the only one missing. So, I left a comment they'll never forget. Since everyone is there, you clearly don't need me. The mortgage and taxes are all yours now. Good luck. Within 10 minutes, I had 30 missed calls. But I didn't answer. I'm done being the invisible sponsor of a family that treats me like a stranger. It had always been this way. In our house, my sister Ava was the sun, and I was just the shadow that followed quietly behind. When we were kids, my straight-A report cards were tucked into a drawer, while her finger paintings were framed in the living room. As I got older and became a successful architect, that dynamic didn't change, it just got more expensive. I became the reliable one. The one they called when the roof leaked or when medical bills piled up. I thought that by being their financial safety net, I would finally earn a seat at the table. I was wrong. Seeing that photo under the golden lights of the restaurant made me realize I hadn't just been uninvited from a dinner, I had been uninvited from the family years ago. It had always been this way. Long before the unpaid mortgages and the forged signatures, there was the silence of my childhood. In our house, love wasn't unconditional, it was a limited resource, and Ava had managed to claim the lion's share before I was even old enough to understand the game. I remember the regional science fair when I was 12. I had spent 4 months building a scale model of a sustainable bridge, my fingers permanently stained with wood glue and my eyes tired from calculating load-bearing weights. I won first place. I remember standing on that stage, clutching my blue ribbon and scanning the crowd for my parents' faces, only to find their empty seats. When I finally got home, breathless and proud, my mother didn't even look up from the kitchen table. She was too busy cooing over a masterpiece Ava had made in her 5-minute art class, a series of lopsided stick figures drawn in orange crayon. "Look at the movement Ava captured, Olivia," my mother had whispered, her eyes shining with a genuine pride I had never seen directed at me. My blue ribbon was placed on the kitchen counter, where it was eventually buried under a pile of mail and forgotten. Ava's stick figures, however, were framed and hung in the center of the hallway. That was the blueprint of our lives. Ava was the creative, the sensitive soul who needed constant watering, while I was the strong one. In my parents' minds, being strong meant I didn't need praise, and being reliable meant I didn't need attention. They treated my achievements like expected chores and Ava's basic existence like a miracle. I worked twice as hard just to be noticed half as much. When I got into a prestigious architecture program, my father simply nodded and asked if I could help Ava move into her new apartment. When I landed my first senior role at the firm, the celebration lasted exactly 3 minutes before the conversation shifted to Ava's latest spiritual journey that they were currently funding. I grew up believing that if I could just provide enough value, if I could just be successful enough or helpful enough, the scales would eventually balance. I thought that by becoming the pillar of the family, they would finally have to look up and see me. I didn't realize that pillars aren't invited to the party, they are just expected to hold up the roof while everyone else dances inside. I spent 30 years trying to move out of the shadow of Ava's stick figures, never realizing that my parents were the ones holding the flashlight, purposely pointing it away from me. By the time I reached my late 20s, the emotional distance between us had been paved over with cold, hard currency. I had stopped expecting a phone call just to hear my voice. Instead, the vibration of my phone usually meant a contractor was standing in their kitchen or a medical bill had arrived in the mail. I had become less of a daughter and more of a specialized insurance policy, one that didn't require a premium, only my constant, silent compliance. It started small, with loans that were never intended to be repaid. A few $100s here for Ava's car repairs, a few hundred there for a plumbing emergency they hadn't budgeted for. But as my career as an architect took off, their requests grew in scale and frequency. When the roof of the family home began to leak, staining the ceiling above the hallway where Ava's childhood drawings still hung, my father didn't ask if I had the money. He simply sent me the quote from the roofing company with a text that read, "They can start Monday if you can wire the deposit." I wired it. I wired the money for my mother's elective knee surgery when the insurance wouldn't cover the premium facility she insisted on. I wired the money for the property taxes every spring, and eventually, I took over the mortgage entirely when my father retired early without a solid pension plan. Each time, I told myself I was buying my way back into their hearts. I thought that if I made myself indispensable, they would finally have to acknowledge my worth. But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. Our conversations turned into business transactions. My mother would call me, and for the first 30 seconds, she would ask how work was going, just long enough to pivot to a disaster that only a check from me could fix. They never thanked me for the roof that kept them dry or the walls that kept them warm. They treated my labor as if it were a natural resource, like water from a well that would never run dry. I was the human ATM, a role I accepted because I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped. I feared that if I stopped paying, the thin thread connecting me to them would finally snap, leaving me truly alone. I didn't realize that they had already cut the thread years ago. I was just the one holding the bill for a relationship that had already gone bankrupt. I was providing the foundation for a home I wasn't allowed to live in, and the more I built for them, the less I had left for myself. I was a resource to be managed, not a child to be loved, and as long as the money flowed, they were happy to let me believe I was part of the family. The call came on a Tuesday, exactly 6 days before the anniversary. I was at my desk, surrounded by blueprints for a new library project, feeling a rare sense of accomplishment. When I saw Mom flash on the screen, I actually smiled, thinking she was calling to finalize the dress code or the time I should arrive at the steakhouse. I had already cleared my schedule and bought a pair of pearl earrings as a gift for her. "Olivia, honey," she began, her voice carrying that specific, airy lilt she used when she was about to ask for a favor or deliver a blow. "We've been looking at the floor plan for the private room at the restaurant. It's so much smaller than the photos showed." The manager was quite firm about the capacity. I paused, my pen hovering over a structural column on my drawing. "Oh, that's a shame. Do you need me to call them? I'm sure as an architect I can suggest a better seating arrangement, or we could look at a different venue." No, she interrupted, her tone sharpening slightly. "It's too late for all that. We've decided to keep it very intimate. Just a few of our oldest friends from the neighborhood, the people who've been there since the beginning, you know? We had to make some really tough cuts, and since you're always so busy with your big projects, we figured you wouldn't mind sitting this one out. It's just limited seating, dear. You understand, don't you?" The silence that followed was heavy. I looked at the mortgage statement sitting on the corner of my desk, the one I had paid just 48 hours prior. I wanted to ask her how there was room for the neighbors but not for the daughter who kept the roof over their heads. I wanted to ask if my busy schedule was also the reason I wasn't invited to the planning meetings. But the old, well-trained version of me took over. "I understand, Mom," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "You're such a star, Olivia." "So reliable," she chirped, relieved that she wouldn't have to deal with a scene. "We'll do a little something together, just us, maybe next month? I'll send you some photos of the cake." When she hung up, I didn't go back to my blueprints. I sat there staring at the pearl earrings on my desk. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that they were just older and stressed, and that being the strong one meant making sacrifices so they could enjoy their night. I chose to believe the lie because the alternative, that I was being intentionally discarded, was a bridge too painful to cross. I forced myself to believe in the limited seating because I wasn't ready to admit that in their hearts, there had never been a place reserved for me at all. The evening of the anniversary was unnervingly quiet. I tried to distract myself with work, but the blueprints on my desk felt like a foreign language. I found myself sitting on my sofa in the dark, the only light in the room coming from the cold, blue glare of my phone. I told myself I wouldn't look. I told myself I was a 30-year-old woman who didn't need a seat at a table to feel whole. But the curiosity was a dull ache I couldn't ignore. I opened Instagram, and there it was. Ava had posted a carousel of photos. The first was a wide shot of a long, rectangular table draped in white linen, glowing under the warmth of a dozen crystal chandeliers. My parents sat at the head, beaming, surrounded by more than 20 people. I saw our neighbors from 3 doors down. I saw my father's golf buddies. I even saw Ava's newest boyfriend, a man they'd known for 3 weeks. The limited seating was a banquet. The intimate dinner was a gala. I scrolled to the next photo. It was a close-up of the group clinking champagne glasses, their faces flushed with laughter and expensive wine. The caption felt like a physical blow to my chest, family only. Finally, we have everyone together. So blessed to have this circle of love. Everyone, I whispered to the empty room. The betrayal wasn't just in the exclusion, it was in the performance of it. They weren't just forgetting me, they were celebrating my absence. They were eating a 5-course meal paid for by the busy daughter who was currently sitting in the dark because she'd skipped her own grocery run to ensure their property taxes were paid on time. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me, replacing the years of lingering guilt. My thumb hovered over the comment box. I didn't stop to overthink it. I didn't consider the fallout or the reliable reputation I was about to incinerate. I typed the words that had been building in my soul for a decade: congratulations on the beautiful party. Since everyone is there, you clearly don't need me anymore. The mortgage and taxes are all yours now. Good luck. I hit send. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, it was the silence before a storm. 5 minutes later, the post was scrubbed from the internet. 10 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate against the coffee table. Mom calling. Dad calling. Ava calling. It didn't stop. The device skittered across the wood like a dying insect, light flashing against the walls of my dark apartment. I didn't reach for it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the safety net. I was the person who had finally stepped out of the shadow, and as I watched the screen blink into 100 missed calls, I realized that the limited seating was now their problem to solve. The following week was a barrage of digital noise that I met with a wall of silence. I blocked my mother, then my father, and finally Ava, after she sent a particularly venomous text calling me a heartless accountant who was trying to ruin their lives over a dinner party. I thought I had cut the cord, but I hadn't realized how deeply they had entangled me in their web until the calls shifted from family to a stranger with a neutral, corporate voice. It was a Tuesday morning when a representative from the bank's mortgage department reached out. I expected them to be calling about my parents' delinquency, but the woman on the line asked for Olivia Carter, the primary account holder. I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. I think there's a mistake, I said, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I pay the mortgage, but the loan is in my parents' names. I'm just a third-party payer. That's not what our records show, Miss Carter, the voice replied, followed by the sound of keys clicking. A refinance was finalized 4 months ago. The title and the primary loan were transferred into your name. We're calling because the payment is now 8 days past due, and since you're the sole guarantor, this will be reported to the credit bureaus within the week. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. I didn't hear the rest of her professional script. My mind was racing back to 4 months ago. I remembered a pile of documents my mother had brought over, claiming they were insurance renewals for the house. She had told me that because I paid the bills, the insurance company needed my digital signature to authorize communication. I had been in the middle of a high-stress deadline, and I had trusted her. I had clicked the links she sent to my email, barely reading the headers, believing a mother wouldn't set a trap for her own child. She hadn't been asking for permission to talk to an insurance agent, She had been lead generating my financial execution. I hung up and sat trembling at my kitchen table. They hadn't just excluded me from a dinner, they had stolen my identity to secure their own lifestyle. They had leveraged my hard-earned credit score and my professional reputation to offload their debt onto my shoulders, all while treating me like an uninvited guest in my own life. The limited seating at the restaurant wasn't just a lie, it was a distraction. While I was busy being the reliable daughter, they were busy turning me into their collateral. I wasn't just paying for a house I wasn't allowed to visit, I was legally tethered to a sinking ship they had built using my own name. For the first time, the sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, architectural precision. They wanted a house? Fine. But they were about to learn what happens when the person holding up the foundation finally decides to walk away. The following morning, I wasn't an architect, I was a forensic investigator of my own life. I sat in a glass-walled office downtown, the sterile smell of floor wax and old paper filling my lungs as I waited for Clark, a sharp-eyed attorney who specialized in financial fraud. On the desk between us sat the heavy folder I had spent all night compiling, a paper trail that documented every penny I had poured into a house that was now a legal cage. Clark flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to a grim, tight-lipped frown. He pulled up the digital records from the bank on his monitor, rotating the screen so I could see. "Here is the problem, Olivia," he said, pointing to a series of timestamps on the refinance application. The digital signatures were authenticated using an IP address linked to your parents' home, not your apartment or your office. And look at the authorization metadata. I leaned in, my breath hitching. The metadata showed that the consent had been bypassed using a saved password and security questions that I had set up for my mother years ago to help her manage her basic emails. They hadn't just tricked me into clicking a link, they had actively logged into my accounts, reused my personal data, and impersonated me in a digital environment to finalize a $170,000 loan. "It's a sophisticated level of betrayal," Clark noted, his voice low. "They used your history of being reliable against you. Because you've been paying the mortgage from your personal account for years, the bank had no reason to flag a transfer of the deed. To them, it looked like a natural progression of your financial support." I stared at the screen, at the digital version of my name scrawled at the bottom of a document that could bankrupt my future. Seeing it in black and white made the betrayal feel clinical, stripped of the emotional excuses I had used to protect them for decades. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of desperation. This was a calculated, multi-step plan to ensure that even if I ever tried to leave, I would be legally bound to their debts. "What are the options?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We file a report for identity theft and a civil complaint for fraud," Clark replied. "But you have to understand, Olivia, once we start this, there is no going back. This is criminal. Your sister's name is on the witness portion as the notary for the digital session. She could face prison time for falsifying these records." I thought about the anniversary photo, the golden lights, the clinking glasses, and the caption that said everyone was there. I thought about the 3 years of my life I had given them, and the 30 years they had spent making me feel like I was lucky to be ignored. "They didn't hesitate when they signed my name," I said, standing up and smoothing my coat. "Don't hesitate when you file the papers." The paper trail was a map of their greed, and for the first time, I knew exactly where it led. I left the office with a strange sense of weightlessness. The chains they had forged weren't made of love or duty, they were made of fraud. And fraud, unlike family, could be undone by a judge. The invitation to Sunday brunch was framed as a peace summit, but the frantic tone of my mother's voice on the phone suggested a desperate damage control mission. I arrived at the restaurant, the same steakhouse where they had celebrated their anniversary just a week prior, carrying a slim, black leather folder. It was my version of an architect's blueprint, but instead of building a home, it was designed to dismantle one. As I approached the table, the atmosphere was thick with practiced grievance. My mother had already begun dabbing at her eyes with a linen napkin, while Ava sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of indignant fury. My father wouldn't even look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the menu as if he could find a way out of his debts buried in the list of appetizers. Olivia, thank heaven, my mother started, her voice trembling with artificial frailty. That comment you left, the things people are saying online, it's been a nightmare. We're willing to forgive you, dear, but you have to fix this mortgage situation immediately. The bank called us, and they were very aggressive. I'm not here to apologize, I said, my voice cutting through her performance like a cold wind. I didn't sit down. I simply placed the folder in the center of the table, covering the breadbasket. And I'm not here to fix your situation. I'm here to show you how I'm fixing mine. Ava scoffed, reaching for the folder. What is this? More of your drama? It's a criminal affidavit, I replied calmly. The color drained from Ava's face as she pulled out the top page, the digital metadata Clark had uncovered. I watched her eyes dart across the timestamps and the IP addresses. I watched the realization hit her that I knew about her role as the notary for my forged signature. You used my security questions, I said, looking directly at my mother, who had stopped crying instantly. You used the password I set up to help you with your email to steal my identity. You didn't just exclude me from a dinner. You tried to anchor me to your lives by committing a felony. We did it for the family, Olivia, my father finally barked, slamming his hand on the table. We were losing the house. You have so much, and we have nothing. You had a daughter, I said, and for the first time, I felt no pity, only a profound sense of relief. But you treated her like a line of credit. You thought I was too reliable to ever fight back. You thought my need for your love would make me a permanent victim. I leaned in, my shadow falling over the table that had no place for me. I've already filed the identity theft report. The bank is opening a fraud investigation, and Clark is handling the civil suit. I'm moving my life elsewhere. You wanted a family-only celebration? Well, you have it. You three can figure out how to pay for that house together. I turned and walked away before the first scream of protest could reach me. As I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. I didn't look back. The peace summit was over, and for the first time, I was the one who had finally achieved peace. The legal machinery moved with a cold, rhythmic efficiency that my parents had never expected. Once the fraud report was filed and the bank's investigation confirmed the irregularities in the refinance, the protection I had provided for years evaporated overnight. Without my monthly infusions of cash, the house, the very thing they had committed a felony to keep, transformed from a sanctuary into a liability. The foreclosure notice didn't arrive quietly. It was a bright, neon orange sticker affixed to the front door, a scarlet letter for the modern age that signaled the beginning of the end. In a neighborhood where reputation was the only currency that mattered, the respectable image my parents had spent decades cultivating began to crumble. The neighbors, the same ones who had clinked glasses at the anniversary dinner I was banned from, now walked a little faster past the driveway. The whispers started at the local grocery store and rippled through the Sunday church pews. The Carters, the pillars of the community, were being evicted. Ava's life, too, was a falling domino. The civil complaint for her role in the forgery made its way to her employer, a high-end real estate firm that took a dim view of notaries who falsified digital sessions. She wasn't just losing her sister, she was losing her career. My father tried to call me from a burner phone, his voice no longer booming with authority but cracked with a desperate, whining plea. He talked about family legacy and forgiveness, but he never once mentioned the word sorry. I watched it all unfold from a distance, like an architect watching a controlled demolition. There was no joy in seeing the house fall, but there was a profound sense of justice. They had built their lifestyle on a foundation of my sacrifice and my stolen identity. Now that the foundation was gone, the structure couldn't stand on its own. The most revealing moment came when I saw a local community Facebook group post. Someone had shared a photo of the foreclosure sign, and the comments were a battlefield. My mother was in there, still trying to play the victim, claiming a banking error and a difficult daughter were to blame. But the truth was out. The bank's public filing of the fraud investigation meant the error had a name, and it wasn't mine. The house of cards had stayed up as long as I was willing to be the windbreak. Now that I had stepped away, there was nothing left but the wreckage of their own greed. They were finally together, just like the photo caption said, but they were together in the ruin they had created for themselves. I moved to Rochester on a gray Tuesday, the kind of day that feels like a clean slate because there is nothing left to see in the rearview mirror. My new apartment is small, but the windows are large, and for the first time in my life, every square inch of the space belongs to me, not just legally, but emotionally. There are no framed stick figures in the hallway and no stacks of other people's bills on the counter. I've learned to enjoy the quiet rhythm of my own company. In the beginning, the silence felt heavy, almost like I was waiting for a phone to ring with an emergency I needed to solve. I would catch myself checking my notifications, bracing for a fresh wave of guilt or a new demand for money. But as the weeks turned into months, that phantom anxiety began to fade. I realized that the silence wasn't a void, it was peace. I still work as an architect, but now I design for clients who respect my time, and I spend my evenings building a life that doesn't require me to be a martyr. I cook dinner for one, listening to the hum of the city outside, and I take long walks through the local parks where no one knows me as the reliable daughter or the human ATM. I am just Olivia. Sometimes, I think about the house. I heard through a distant cousin that my parents moved into a small, cramped rental and that Ava is working a retail job she hates while the legal fallout settles. There is a lingering sadness there, a dull ache for the family I wish I'd had, but it's no longer a weight that pulls me under. I've stopped measuring my worth by how much of myself I can give away. One evening, I stood by my window watching the snow fall over the Rochester skyline. My phone sat on the table, dark and still. I realized then that I had spent 30 years trying to buy a seat at a table that was never built for me. By walking away, I didn't lose a family, I gained myself. I am no longer a shadow or a safety net. I am the architect of my own happiness now, and the foundation is solid. It turns out that peace was the most expensive thing I ever bought, but standing here in the soft, new light of my living room, I know it was worth every single penny.